Imagine a perfect world. Unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no diseases, no threats of any kind whatsoever. 8 creatures were placed inside, young, healthy, perfect. 5 years later, every single one of them was dead. And not one death was caused by anything a doctor could diagnose. This didn't happen to humans. It happened to mice. But what the scientists discovered doesn't just apply to mice. An American scientist named John Calhoun built something he called a paradise for mice. Soft nesting material in every corner, temperature held perfectly stable, cages cleaned by hand on a schedule. 4 males, 4 females, the healthiest specimens from the entire colony. But here's what most people don't know. This wasn't his first experiment. It was his 25th. For 20 years before this, Calhoun had been building one version of paradise after another, in forests, in barns, in laboratory rooms, 24 times in a row. And every single time, the same thing happened. The population exploded. Violence spiked. Mating twisted into something chaotic and compulsive. Then, apathy. Then, extinction. 24 times. So this one, number 25, was meant to be the clean experiment, the final proof, the one nobody could argue with. He set it up inside a federal research lab in Maryland, a 9-foot square enclosure, apartments stacked along every wall, connected by mesh tunnels running floor to ceiling. Calhoun called them walk-up apartments, food hoppers that never ran empty, water bottles that never ran dry. He calculated the space could comfortably support around 3,800 mice. It would never come close to that number. On day 1, he placed his 8 founders inside and shut the lid. For the first 104 days, almost nothing happened. The mice explored, learned who slept where. Then the first litters were born, and the population began to double. Every 55 days, twice as many mice as before. By day 315, more than 600 animals were living inside. They climbed over each other on the ramps, slept in piles, jostled for nesting space at the tops of the apartments. And this is the moment. Everything began to come apart. In a normal mouse colony, when the population grows past what the territory can absorb, the surplus mice leave. They find new ground somewhere else. Inside Universe 25, there was no new ground. The young males, with nowhere to go and no role to fill, began drifting into the center of the enclosure. They formed listless pools of bodies. Calhoun would stand above the pen for hours, watching them do nothing. These mice had no fights to win, no females to court, nothing to defend. They were healthy, well-fed, and they had absolutely nothing to do. When one of them was attacked by another mouse, he would not fight back. He would just lie there, absorb the damage, then stand up, walk a few feet, and lie down again. But not every male went quiet. A second group formed at the opposite extreme. They moved through the enclosure faster than any other mice. They forced themselves into nests other males were trying to defend. They skipped the courtship rituals every other mouse still followed. They refused to be deterred even by violence from dominant males. And the females who couldn't find a place in the social order climbed to the highest apartments and lived there alone. They stopped interacting with males. They stopped reproducing. Calhoun also noticed something he called the behavioral sink. Even when food was equally available everywhere, the mice began crowding compulsively around just a few specific feeders. They could not eat alone. The presence of other mice had become so wired into their feeding instinct that an empty feeder, no matter how full, was useless to them. The crowding got worse and worse around a handful of stations, while the rest of the enclosure sat almost untouched. Then the mothers, who were still trying to raise pups, began to fail in a much darker way. The males who had originally claimed territory grew exhausted from constant patrolling and stopped protecting their families. The mothers had to defend the nests themselves while still nursing. They turned on their own young, abandoned them in scattered places around the enclosure. In some sections of the colony, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. Calhoun wrote later that by this point, the social fabric of the colony was effectively dead. The bodies were still alive. The structure that held them together as a species was not. The pups that did survive were raised by mothers who barely cared whether they lived. They had no model of what a functioning life inside this place looked like. And when they grew up, they behaved like nothing Calhoun had ever seen. The males of this generation never fought, never tried to mate, never engaged in any social activity at all. They ate, they slept, and they groomed themselves, obsessively. Their fur stayed perfect because they never got into a single fight. They moved through the colony as if no other mouse existed in it. Calhoun named them the beautiful ones. They looked like the healthiest mice in the entire colony. They were also functionally dead. On day 560, the population peaked at 2,200 mice. It would never go higher. The last successful conception inside Universe 25 happened on day 920. After that, no new mice were born. The beautiful ones kept grooming themselves. The secluded females stayed in their high apartments. Violence carried on in pockets with no purpose left to it. And one by one, the mice died of old age, with no replacements coming up behind them. On May 23, 1973, the last mouse in Universe 25 died. 4 years and 10 months after Calhoun shut the lid. He wrote that the mice had died 2 deaths. The first was the death of the spirit. The second was the death of the body. The first one happened years before the second. When his paper came out, the world ran with the obvious reading: comfort kills, abundance kills. A life with no struggle destroys itself. The image of the beautiful ones, perfectly groomed and quietly extinct, became one of the most cited metaphors of the late 20th century. But that reading was not what Calhoun actually said. His real conclusion was sitting right there in the paper, in his own words. For an animal as complex as a human being, he wrote, a similar collapse was not just possible, it was logical. If the number of individuals capable of filling meaningful roles greatly exceeds the number of roles available, only violence and disruption can follow. The killer wasn't comfort. The killer was the disappearance of meaningful roles. And here's the part almost nobody quotes. Calhoun himself was not a doomer. He spent the rest of his career not predicting the collapse, but trying to prevent it. He kept building new universes. He kept changing the variables. He believed it could be done. He believed that humans could choose differently than the mice did. He wrote that as physical space contracts, the only way forward is to extend ourselves into conceptual space, into ideas, into networks, into the work of building roles that did not exist before. He called it ideational generativity, a long phrase for a simple idea. The way out is to keep making new reasons to be here. The mice didn't have a choice. We still do.